name is Nancy Harris, and I was fortunate enough to live in Los Angeles, and I had a child that had severe disabilities, and his neurologist was a world-famous pediatric neurologist by the name of John Menkes. And I had worked with John Menkes at UCLA at a pediatric seizure clinic, and a couple of years had passed by, and we ran into each other, and he said, I'm learning about this disorder, and it's really terrifically interesting. And he said, nobody's looking at it. And he said, call me, let's get together for lunch and we'll talk about it. So I went to his office and we had lunch, and he said, so we're thinking about starting a foundation. And he literally said to me, do you want to do it? And I said, well, what does that mean? Do I want to do it? And he said, I don't know, we'll figure it out. And that was in 1976, and the Dystonia Foundation was born.
Well, I'm Dennis Kessler, and back in 1981, our son was diagnosed with dystonia, and we didn't know what that was. As a matter of fact, it took us 3 years to get a diagnosis. And we live here in Chicago, and we had gone to doctor after doctor, probably about 10 or 13 different doctors, and nobody could tell us what it was. But one night, my mother-in-law was at a dinner party, and there was a psychologist there, and she was describing our frustration at not being able to find out what it was that her grandchild had. And she described the symptoms, and he said, I think I remember reading an article about that in one of my psychiatry journals. And he sent us the article, and it was clear that that's what our son had just by reading the article, because there was some case studies, and what the article was about dystonia patients who have been misdiagnosed with psychosomatic illnesses. And we could tell that that's what the article was all about, and that's what our son had. I called the doctor who wrote the article, who was a doctor in New York, and he said, I can't diagnose it over the phone, but we'd be happy to see him here in New York, which eventually we did. But at the same time, I asked him, are there any patient organizations for this thing called dystonia? And he said, yeah, there's an organization out in California. I'll give you their phone number. And I called the office, and I talked to this beautiful young woman. I didn't know she was beautiful at the time, but now I know. Her name was Nancy Harris. And she was the first person to really talk to me about dystonia and what it all meant. That was 1981, and I have to tell you that that was long before the internet, so it was very difficult to get any information, and it was almost impossible to talk to other patients for this rare neurological movement disorder called dystonia. But Nancy was she was our lifeline, and it really meant a lot to us, and she introduced us to other patient families here in the Chicago area, which was also an incredible help to us to finally meet other people and get involved with possible treatments that would help our son alleviate some of his symptoms.
For all of the numbers of dystonia people, the ripple effect of their families and the people that their lives have affected is just unbelievable. So I think that, when you're trying to put something together about dystonia, it's not so easy because there's so many different forms, and you can't go, oh my God, this person has writer's cramp, that's horrible. But the whole picture is truly worth telling, worth hearing about. But the picture of dystonia is like a puzzle, and there's so many pieces to it, and some are really unimportant and insignificant in the big picture, but the big picture is truly amazing.
One of the most over 35 years, there's been so many incredible times, but one of the most exciting was when we found the first dystonia gene, when we identified what's called DYT1, children's onset dystonia. It was an incredible thing. We had funded research in this area for almost 13 years, but this one proved out. And we had an incredible research team in Boston that identified the gene, which was a major, major scientific accomplishment. One of the other incredible things that happens in the foundation is the blending of our board of directors and our scientific advisory board. It's very unusual for patient advocacy groups like us to blend the families with the doctors. And so what we do every year is we have our scientific advisory board, which are scientists from all over the world, renowned movement disorder specialists and other professional people meet to talk about the latest research ideas. And at that meeting, we have our lay board of directors as visitors and as guests. The doctors have their own meeting, but we're observers. And many of the doctors have told us how special that is, because they're locked away in a laboratory. They're not all of them clinicians. Many of them are just research scientists, bench-type scientists, and they know about the dystonia disorder, but they never get to see patients and intermingle with them. And we, the patients, have an opportunity to ask them questions, but also personally thank them for the wonderful work they do for us. So I think the progress that we have made over 35 years is really incredible. When our son was diagnosed, there were virtually no sure treatments. Well, he's 43 now, and as a result of the better treatments that we have now, and as a result of the discovery of the gene, the DYT1 gene for children's onset, which is what he is virtually symptom-free.
Yeah, you know, when I first met the Kessler family, I'll never forget, you invited Lois and I to your house for dinner, and there were these three good-looking young men, and here was Arthur. And when I look at him today, he's this charismatic, terrific man, husband, father, and he's taken, what life handed him, and he's the president of our foundation now.
Hope is something this foundation sells with relish, because we have a track record to prove that hope is not lost. We also have a track record of showing that you're not alone. Most patients, when they first discover that they have dystonia in the family, like us, you feel so alone. But this foundation has tens of thousands of people all over the country who have established support groups and chapters throughout the country and in Canada, and support newly diagnosed patients with somebody they can talk to who understands where they're at.
Thank you.
And thank you for helping support the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation. We appreciate it.